Hello, hello. All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Shimon Newman. I'm going to be telling you today about the Technologies for Accountability Foundation, which is an initiative that is being started by my father and I. I'll get right into it. I guess, or I won't. Okay, cool. So I'm just going to start off with this as kind of like a little bit of background for us to be considering as I get into this conversation. These are some questions that Vitalik has put forward in the community a long time ago. I, for one, think that the answers to these questions are pretty abysmal. I don't think that blockchain and especially cryptocurrencies, et cetera, are really being used as much to save people or help people as the community would like to believe. And it's something that I've grown quite frustrated with. So just with that in the backdrop, I'm going to continue on with telling you about what I'm working on. So I'm going to give you a quick background, tell you how I got here, talk about blockchain for good, kind of end with a call to arms. So first and foremost, I'm the CEO of Location-Based Incentives. We're a company that develop non-predatory incentive structures, so ones that don't rely on the extraction of data in order to get what we want. We work with different governments and nonprofits for this purpose. Today, I'm here primarily representing the Technologies for Accountability Foundation, and I'm also the head of token design for Influencer Ltd., which is a venture capital company that is on the path towards decentralization. Feel free to come and approach me about any of these projects. So I entered the crypto space in 2017. I was originally interested in using incentive structures and crypto economies to coordinate, positive net gains in subjective economies. I've lived in 8 different countries because of my father's work. And part of that work brought us to Kazakhstan, where I lived for about 4 years. That's where I went to high school. My father, Aaron Bornstein, he headed the Bota Foundation, which was the world's first foundation to be funded through repatriated or stolen assets. I'll go more into what that means. But the program was able to directly benefit over 200,000 Kazakh citizens and is kind of regarded as one of the only success stories of repatriating assets back to the people they were stolen from. This is an issue that goes on all over the world, and for instance, in Nigeria, over $1 billion has been stolen from the people over the last 20 years, although it's now being returned. So my dad wasn't working in this. I was working in blockchain. A lot of these things that he was talking about were related to accountability, transparency. I was like, well, maybe blockchain's the obvious answer. He didn't really believe me at first, but then we teamed up. And last year, we were able to speak in the French Senate at a Transparency International event there about our work. And I really got more excited about the applications for DLTs in the specific context. So some background on stolen assets and what I mean by stolen assets. The United Nations Convention Against Corruption has identified stolen assets as a potential funder for the goals of the SDGs. My father's foundation that he was running in Kazakhstan was called BOTA, which stands for Young Camels, and it was used primarily to invest in the education of Kazakh citizens as well as increasing support for vulnerable people, especially women. This was done in partnership with the Stolen Asset Recovery Initiative, which is out of the World Bank Group, as well as key players from the U.S. Department of Justice and the Swiss government and the Kazakh government. And this is something that happens all over the world, all the time. The scale of the money is absolutely staggering. Right now, there are over $1 trillion globally that are just frozen. Because people cannot agree what to do with the money. And this happens after a dictator is caught, someone is sent to jail, and it's a laborious process that with lots of different stakeholders who can't really agree on whether the money should be used or if it can be used for any good purposes. So I'm just going to talk about all this should be fairly obvious for everyone in the room. But of course, when we're talking about the repatriation of stolen assets, returning money, that's going to require us to think about supply chains, identity, transparency, knowing where numbers are flowing in and out, being able to verify and measure impact. So, programmability, supply chain, as I said, we're really looking specifically at conditional cash transfer programs because those are some of the most efficacious ways to redistribute money and to redistribute wealth, as well as self-sovereign identity. This is a very important recipe in any conditional cash transfer program. So I'm also right now very concerned with how can we protect the citizens from an external perspective when we're redistributing money towards them. And that brings us to the Technologies for Accountability Foundation, which is the brainchild of myself and my father, Aaron Bornstein. And our goal is to leverage existing and emerging technologies to increase the transparency of stolen asset repatriation, as well as development aid in general. Right now, we are making significant progress in both Nigeria and Uzbekistan. I'm not going to talk too much about that right now, but if you're interested, please feel free to approach me afterwards about those ongoings. And we're continuously partnering with relevant organizations and are looking to partner with more. So we're partnered with the African Network for Environmental and Economic Justice, Disperse, TOPL, which is a impact monetizing platform, as well as the IXO protocol. Our long-term vision is to develop somewhat of an analog to the Hyperledger Fabric, but for development aid purposes, and is basically just to show that we can use emerging technologies like DLTs to increase the transparency of the stolen asset repatriation process, which should, in theory, help convince more governments to release these funds. So just imagine what we could do with $1 trillion to save this earth. So it's all there already, there for the taking. We are not interested, my father and I, in developing any specific blockchain protocol ourselves. We're agnostic in that sense, but we are interested in connecting as many relevant tools as possible to kind of come up with a consortium of offers for what could be used on a case-by-case basis depending on the needs of the governments and civil society organizations that are engaged in the discussions of repatriation. So I'm just going to end this with a word of caution for those within this community. So last year, I was at EthCC. I am the uncredited YouTube spokesperson for the conference, although I had more hair back then. And I had this really life-changing experience that I just want to tell you guys about briefly. So it all starts with Colgate. This is it's a weird little story, but basically, there was a game theorist who was presenting on how you could use board games to simulate token economies. I thought it was really interesting, really good event. But afterwards, an organizer in the crowd, asked the question, something like, hey, me and my friends want to figure out how to send Ethereum or Ether to the homeless in Paris. Do you have any ideas of how we could do this? And this game theorist, he grabs the mic, he goes, that's a really interesting question. This is a man with a PhD, really intelligent. And he starts telling us this story, which is, this reminds me of something similar, which is I had a friend, and they were not very wealthy, and they had a child who had Down syndrome. And this child, for some reason, only wanted to use branded toothpaste, but they couldn't afford it. So I wanted to set up a system to use Ether to just give this kid toothpaste automatically. And then he proceeded to say it was much more complicated than I thought. I had to set up a wallet that would automatically transfer to an exchange, which would then automatically be converted into Amazon gift cards, which would then be sent into Colgate and sent to the kid. And everyone started applauding. Woo, that's brilliant. He said, maybe you can do something like this for the homeless people in Paris. And for me, it was this moment of almost madness because I was just thinking to myself, like, give this kid the fucking toothpaste. You know what I mean? Like, what are you talking about? How are you reaching these levels of abstraction for something that is fundamentally based on human interaction? If you want to help the homeless people in Paris, volunteer. Give them money, give them your time. But if we keep on focusing on how to automate everything, if we keep on focusing on how to tap into oracles, I fear that we're not leveraging the opportunities of this technology the correct way, nor in a way that is in the original intention of why we hopefully all got started exploring distributed ledger design. So with that being said, let's design better solutions, and thank you for your attention. We're looking continuously to partner with relevant technology providers, especially those that are concerned with helping vulnerable people. And there's my email if you're interested in reaching out. And that's it. If you guys have any questions, I'll open up now. Any questions?
Yes. What technology have you? I'm not sure I understood what technology exactly you worked on at the foundation. Have you built specific prototype on a use case or assessed a bit the situation?
It's a good question. Unfortunately, I'm not in a position where I can really disclose too much at this time, but we are involved in the repatriation processes right now with both Nigeria and Uzbekistan, and those are two separate big lump sums of money that are being returned or have the potential to be returned. In Nigeria, it's happening no matter what, and we're becoming involved in the process of optimizing the existing, they're using a conditional cash transfer program already, and we're interested in optimizing that through DLT technology. In the case of Uzbekistan, we're actually getting involved in trying to convince the US Department of Justice, as well as key stakeholders within the Uzbeki government, that this is a viable strategy for returning the funds. So it can never be a one-case-fits-all situation, and it really is very context dependent and very early days. And we're kind of at the stage right now where we're transitioning from exploratory into actually making things happen. But I can't really speak too much more on specifics at this point.
Yep. I mean, I appreciate you can't speak on the exact specifics, but conceptually, if I understand what you're doing correctly, it sounds to be very much, it's very relationship based and it's political. It's trying to bring people together to do the right thing. And it sounds fascinating. But can you say something about what role blockchain might play, at least on a conceptual level?
Sure. So the things that's the concern here is that the money from frozen bank actually reaches the intended recipient or funds the intended project, whether that's school, infrastructure, etc. So what we're interested is leveraging existing protocols such as IXO, which has a way of monitoring impact and knowing that, through APIs, etc., that projects are actually being completed. Or Topol, which is a decentralized project that issues, what are they called? Credits, like the equivalent of carbon credits, but for development aid, so that they can use APIs as well to prove that, for instance, air quality is getting better from a project that has been funded by stolen assets to improve air quality, or that literacy levels are rising. If you're looking at just purely the distribution of funds, then we might be looking at Disperse, which has a novel mechanism for transferring funds a lot faster to people that need it than traditional banks, as well as having a open and verifiable framework so anyone can peer in and see that the money, there's no slippage. That's a huge issue with this type of money to begin with. Right now, there are still lots of people that are tapping into these stolen assets, which is totally illegitimate and irresponsible. But I just don't think that there's a lot. Well, let me ask a question. Who here knew the amount of stolen assets prior to this that were out there? Right? It's something that is not really on people's radar. The only reason I know about it is because my dad did it. That's the life that my dad has had. And it is a very political thing, as you said, as well. I'm really coming in from the technology side, but a lot of our momentum is based on our ability to coordinate with the right people and reach consensus prior to even discussing these types of technologies. And so that's where my dad has really been instrumental in driving us forward. So I hope that answers your question, but we are also, the things that I mentioned earlier, it really is about increasing the transparency, the programmability, so that we can come up with interesting mechanisms for a specific life cycle of a development aid project that's funded by stolen assets, so that we can reduce a lot of the overhead costs associated with its monitoring. So like in Kazakhstan, the Bota Foundation was redistributing $110 million, but about 30 million was spent purely on making sure that the money was going to where it was supposed to go. So if we can reduce that overhead via DLTs by even a small fraction, we are greatly increasing the available funds for actually making a direct impact in people's lives. Yeah. Okay, thank you very much.